So how willing are our political leaders, senior bureaucrats, media leaders, business leaders, and those who actually view themselves as peers of these groups, how willing are they to cheat? Or more specifically, to cheat in an election? A recent Rasmussen survey shed some frightening details which I believe that we all need to know. Now, last week, I actually produced a video about a survey that was conducted by RMG Research, which is a company that's run by well-known pollster Scott Rasmussen. And the published results were made by a group called the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. And I've actually linked to that original report down below in the video description, and I don't want to just rehash all the details that I discussed last week. However, after I published that video, I was actually contacted by someone in my state who subscribes to RMG Research and who had full access to the full survey results. They call it kind of a full slide deck presentation, which was helpfully forwarded to me. And this had even more shocking information, which for some reason was not in the original public presentation that was produced from the survey. So this result had to do with the answers to the following question. Would you be willing to cheat rather than lose a close election? That's an interesting question. Now, when this question was given to average people like you and I and kind of our fellow citizens, fellow voters, approximately 7% admitted that they would be willing to cheat rather than lose a close election. Now, more importantly to me is the fact that 93% of our fellow citizens, regardless of party affiliation, race, income, or geography, that they would not be willing to cheat in an election. This, I believe, is actually good news. It kind of makes sense to me. Now, obviously, I don't want that 7% to have anything to do with elections, but at least the vast majority of people want elections and election results to be fair and honest. However, as I mentioned in my last video, this Rasmussen RMG survey was actually focused on political, business, and financial elites in our country. Now, they defined this as those who had a postgraduate degree, made more than $150,000 in income, and then lived mostly in kind of urban, dense areas. Now, there was also a larger subset of this group who were defined as Ivy League elites, and they went to either an Ivy League college or a handful of others that are basically other colleges that are also considered elite institutions in this country, like Stanford or MIT or Johns Hopkins, for example. And then there was a subset of the elite that was also considered politically obsessed. That was how they defined themselves. Now, these are the elites who work in government, work closely with government, or who are focused on the political process. They all go to these fundraisers, and they're the ones that kind of keep the politicians going. So when our elite is asked, would you be willing to cheat rather than lose a close election? The responses are far more concerning. For the politically elite, those most involved and obsessed with the political process and politics in our society, 69% of them admitted that they would be willing to cheat to win a close election. Now, please understand the significance of this result. According to my contact, who was on the original presentation by Scott Rasmussen of these survey results that was made a few weeks ago, Rasmussen stated that this was actually the most shocking and terrifying survey result that he had ever uncovered in 40 years of conducting these surveys. Now, I mean, if you actually look at the difference, you can see here, right, 7% of Americans, average Americans, would be willing to cheat to win a close election. But then all the way down, 69% of our political elite, the very people most likely to be able to actually influence a close election, 69% of them are willing to openly admit that they'd be willing to cheat to win a close election. Now, I believe this is actually a very big deal, and this is terrifying. And this really should concern everyone. Now, listen, last week when I discussed the results of this survey that had been published, I was more concerned about the obvious disconnect from the rest of us that existed between those in our society who kind of hold these political offices, run these government agencies, and influence our public policy. My concern was the willingness of these elites to support the imposition of very harmful and liberty-destroying policies, basically, on the rest of us. They think that those harmful policies are great, in part because I don't believe that they think or you can even conceive of those policies having any impact on themselves. And this is just the modern version of kind of this famous let them eat cake Marie Antoinette sort of statement from the French Revolution area. Now, our elite today, just like during the French Revolution, and just like we've seen so often in the past, are entirely disconnected from the rest of us. They live in this bubble in which it apparently is culturally and morally acceptable to harm the rest of us for their own causes, and where they clearly are willing to cheat and be dishonest to get their way. So, okay, why does this matter today? Well, here's why this matters to me and why it should matter to you and everyone else that you know around you. Our modern political, business, government, media, educational, and financial elite are making horrible, disconnected public policy decisions that impact all of us. And they appear to be mostly disconnected from the harmful results that these public policies inflict on the rest of us. They clearly believe that their harmful policies won't hurt them, but they absolutely do harm the rest of us. And this is everything from overseas wars. I mean, hey, it isn't their kids in the military, to censorship, right? They believe everyone must agree with them, and anyone who doesn't must be censored, silenced, canceled, and of course, shadow banned. This also includes taxes, right? They always carve out a loophole for themselves very conveniently. And of course, to taking away our ability to defend ourselves, because after all, these elite kind of live in gated communities, often with private security, and they don't suffer the direct consequences of the crime that they encourage. I mean, after all, nobody's stealing their catalytic converter in the middle of the night. Of course, this includes inflation, because after all, these guys hedge and invest. You and I pay through the nose and suffer. It includes illegal immigration, because these guys, these elite people, tend to love it because it makes the peasants cheaper to hire when they want their home remodeled and the lawn mowed. And of course, there's many other policies, both big and small. The very people who so often are influencing and making these decisions are absolutely not concerned that they hurt you and I when they inflict their decisions on the rest of us. Now, my regular viewers and anybody who looks at my bio on my website, you're well aware that I'm an Ivy League college graduate myself. I well know the type of people who go there, and I know that I would only trust a very handful of my fellow graduates with any power or authority over public policy. Those I would trust in that capacity were few and very far between. And they usually weren't the ones who went into government or media in the first place. The rest of them should never be anywhere close to that type of influential decision-making. And yet, unfortunately, many of them currently reside in those very agencies, financial institutions, political leadership, big media, and other places where they actually damage our future every day, I believe. Now, our elite, as defined in this survey, have great and undue influence and basically over our electoral process, and they can clearly influence the outcomes should they choose to do so. And they are openly willing to cheat to get their way, or at least a majority of them are. This is why we need better transparency and clarity in our election process. This is why we must put the spotlight on our government and those who influence it. And frankly, I also believe that this is why we need more turnover in these places, particularly in our government and our politicians. And they should be replaced with people who have more direct connection to regular Americans rather than an increasingly out-of-touch elite who care very little for the damage they do to the rest of us as long as they're not personally impacted. Now, so in closing, none of these problems fix themselves. It actually takes a tireless work of people, just like you and I, to change things. We're probably facing tough and challenging times ahead. This really appears just inevitable to me. We should all be as prepared as we can be. So prepare now and know that it is better to be trying to have an influence over the inevitable changes coming rather than just suffering the consequences of whatever it is that they choose to throw at us. Because, in the end, remember, the future belongs to those who show up. So let's start showing up now.